Welcome to Socialism for All office hours. So we're doing a live stream here at twitch.tv/socialism S4A. The date is July 25, 2023. And we've got about 36 people in the chat right now. And it's time to stream. Basically during these office hours streams, we just kind of chat about what's new on the channel or anything else that the chat wants to bring to the discussion. I don't do a ton of prep for these streams. In other words, they're not like the numbered live streams where I will clip articles and kind of prepare a whole thing, song and dance for people. There are ways to just do live streams, these office hour streams, with just whoever wants to drop into the stream, within reason. And talk about what's been posted since the last stream and whatever else is on your mind as far as current events or just general questions about socialism, thoughts on life if it's not too far from the topic of society, I guess, class struggle. All right. So before we get started with anything else, let's thank the patrons. There we go. Whose names are about to be on the screen as soon as I can find what I did with the thing. There we go. Alright, thanks to the patrons. Patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. This support is really vital. I appreciate it greatly. We don't run ads or sponsorships or anything like that on the channel, so it's really through this Patreon that you're funding my ability to commit so much time to the channel. Our posting, usually I go a little bit lighter on the posting earlier in the month, and then mid to late month I kind of ramp it up. That is true of this month as well, as we'll get into with what's been posted on the channel recently. But in any case, I'm able to devote as much time as I do to this channel. In part because of the patrons. I mean, I would do some content even if nobody supported, but this amount of support really lets me spend hours and hours on it per week. So much appreciated. Again, patreon.com/socialism for all. And as we switch back here to the regular screen that is just sort of the graphic I put up during my commentary and talking, you'll see that something changed. I took Twitter off. I actually quit Twitter for good and haven't posted since, like a week and a half ago, I think. It was before the X thing. As most of you may know, Elon Musk decided to rebrand Twitter as X.com. Incredibly fucking stupid idea. I think most people in the business world, other capitalists are looking, and just marketing people and stuff are looking at him like, what are you doing? Twitter did not need a rebrand. It's Musk's own actions that caused a lot of users and advertisers to flee the platform. So he's now trying to rebrand it. I mean, that's not the problem. He's trying to fix an unrelated problem that he caused by something that is probably brand suicide. You're going to just introduce a completely generic name, X. That's the fucking stupidest thing I've ever heard. But Elon Musk is basically, if you took your average 4chan asshole and just gave him a ton of money. No sense, no clue, nothing, just money. He's pretty much what you would get, I think. So there's a sort of plot twist there. Let me see if I can get the graphic up on the screen. Basically, X is already taken. Now, where did I put this? Oh, so this was one of his posts about it. And soon we shall bid adieu to the Twitter brand and gradually all the birds. So they've already replaced the Twitter bird with an X, which is already used by a lot of porn sites, and that's just not really the wisest move. But anyway, yeah, gradually all the birds. And I added gradually all the users and all the advertisers. But hey, the man spent $44 billion to rebrand, buy a website, and then start destroying it. Who knows why. They were trying to take the Twitter logo off of the building, which they rent. They don't own the building. Apparently they weren't allowed to. the building owner like called the cops on them. I mean, it's just nothing has been going right. But so here's the. It appears that Instagram and Facebook owner Meta holds the trademark for X as it relates to, quote, online social networking services in the fields of entertainment, gaming, and application development. So, like, this whole thing, he owns X.com, which now points to Twitter, but it doesn't look like he has the legal right to use it in the context of a social media service. So it's just this comedy/tragedy of errors. You know, there's a lot of really annoying things about Twitter. But one of the good things is independent journalism. There were a lot of things during 2020, the BLM protests, that I just never would have seen if it hadn't been for Twitter. The stuff I've reposted onto the Socialism for All channel, I never would have seen if it wasn't for the, big horizontal network of people exchanging information on there. It's not perfect. Nothing was going to be perfect, but it was a resource that people were effectively using to share pieces of, snippets from the class struggle that just weren't going to get wide circulation otherwise. Anyway, so like I said, I have, so he's, getting into just one blunder after another there. But I did replace the Twitter with Spotify, and then I was very validated to see that this whole X rebranding thing, which I had no idea about. I was just done with Twitter. I was just done with it. It was actually more. It had been building for a long time. If you listen to these live streams, you know that using Twitter, trying to look for news and stuff like that to use in the live streams. It's just kind of like being in a car crash. I mean, it was really draining me, and I've expressed that many times. But it's kind of like being in a car crash like 50 times an hour being on Twitter. It just kind of gets it's jarring. It just gets your adrenaline going. So anyway, I replaced it there. Now the 4 links that are up are Patreon, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube, which are sort of the main things. For posting, we're also on Bluesky. I understand that Bluesky, for people who don't know, is a Twitter alternative that doesn't have all the features of Twitter, but a lot of the main ones. It's still in beta testing mode, so it's on invite-only status. Recently just they give users an invite code once every 2 weeks. And I've helped 3 communists to get on the site so far, so that's good. We're going to try to turn that into, have it so that people think of Bluesky and they go, oh yeah, that communist site that I like. That would be ideal. So if you are a communist on Bluesky, in these critical germinal days, try, it's not tweeting over there, it's skeeting, which the site developers do not want people to use, but it's what everyone says. Anyway, skeet and reskeet communist content. Like, if you can keep it to 80-90% communist content, we really need to swing the timeline. Because right now, it almost feels like some kind of cringy dating app. Just lots of people posting lewd content and just sort of flirting. And it's like, okay, fine, but the draw for me to the Bird app was the fucking news. So, like, yeah, we need to get some serious kind of left-wing class struggle content going. Fortunately, a lot of people are talking about the strikes, whether it's the writers' strike in Hollywood, the actors' strike that have now joined them, and then the Teamsters UPS strike, which was threatened. And actually today, just by threatening the strike, that union, the Teamsters UPS union, was able to get what they wanted. And so I believe the strike has now been called off. So if you have a strong union, you can get what you want just by threatening to strike. And then beyond that, a level of union power that we haven't realized yet is you can actually be strong enough to kick the capitalists to the curb and just take over the industry in which you work, and then the workers really do run it. You can have a situation under capitalism, under capitalist ownership of industry, where the workers, quote unquote, run things. Like, the capitalists can't effectively discipline them. The workers kind of decide more. But ultimately, I mean, in that case, even with the workers, quote unquote, running things, they don't actually quite, legally run them or anything like that. That is where an even stronger union, combined with mass strikes and political strikes, comes in that's a level, again, of union power, union strength that the U.S. working class has not yet realized, and that's not yet realized throughout its whole history. The union movement today, overall, unfortunately, is very weak compared to historical levels. We need to rebuild that. And we do see in the last few years a slight upsurge beginning to happen in the labor movement in terms of just union density, the percentage of private sector workplaces that are unionized. That needs to keep going up, and they can't be, complacent. If you can get the numbers up, but then not really be fighting, that doesn't really mean anything. I think as conditions get tougher, people are going to have to fight for more just to survive. And, you can get some militant class struggle going. But we've got to really rebuild these unions. It's one of the highest priorities, if not the absolute highest priority. Because we can study the history of Marxism and the philosophy of it and the economics of it. If you don't have a strong, organized, militant labor movement, then you have no way of actually effecting workers' power. That's where it comes from. And that's also, we can scratch our heads and wonder, why isn't there a better vanguard? Why aren't people supporting or forming left-wing political parties, or a party, or, a congress of parties, something like that? Well, it's because people are still class unconscious. They haven't gone through the crucible of struggling. And that's, you can get some class consciousness from studying books and studying history, and that's important because we need the theory to inform our practice and vice versa. This is scientific socialism. You study, you hypothesize, you experiment, and then you revisit your hypothesis and develop a theory out of all that practice and experimental observation. And in this way, we pave a path to the seizing of power, control over industry, and of power over the state as well, conquest of state power. Both those things are key, but people, without good struggle, you don't get a good vanguard. Vanguard just being that portion of the working class which is most class conscious. It's a relative term. Some people, like anarchists, wrong-headedly view the term vanguard as like elitist, and they refer to, quote, vanguardists. It's just a simple fact. Some people in the working class are less class conscious, some are moderately class conscious, some are very class conscious. So you have your sort of backward masses, the middle masses, the advanced masses, and the vanguard of the people, who are just, they're labor leaders, they're people who have led struggles, studied economics, studied politics, looked at the history of imperialism and everything over time. But your vanguard grows in numbers and in strength with struggle. And so we need the labor movement to kick back into high gear, and for it to be militant, anti-capitalist, radical, not co-opted, not just fighting for a fair day's wage, but fighting for real worker power. We have to get rid of capitalist control of industry and of the state. So, right now the capitalists as a class rule society. There needs to be a revolutionary change. Workers need to rule society. Revolution, a change in which class rules society. And how do you do that? Well, you've got to build a lot of strength to do that. And when we're looking at, 10, 11% unionization in the U.S. Labor movement, in the U.S. workforce generally, that's really insufficient. So we can sit here and, discuss history and study theory, and indeed we do need to prepare the ground for people to come in, as more and more workers will do, as their conditions become desperate and they really start, out of desperation, looking for solutions. We need to have, education and organization available for people to pick up and run with. But it is a bit of a waiting game for now. I mean, we do the agitation. It's not like just purely passive waiting. We do the agitation and we do the education that we can. But I say it's waiting because it is a numbers game. Until the numbers get up, a lot of this remains somewhat hypothetical. So anytime that you see labor news, no matter what sort of social media you're on or with people in real life, share that news, bring it up, talk about it, make propaganda about it, spread, whether it's images or whatever, celebrating strikes and unionization, spreading information on how to start unions, which we have a few guides on the channel, as to how to organize. That's really critical. That's like the foundation of the socialist movement, and it is really currently lacking. There's a number of reasons for that we've discussed over live streams and over the 3.5 years that we've been doing this channel. Labor law, for example, is very skewed in the United States against workers and in favor of employers. That's not to say every law or that there's no legal protections. I mean, you have the legal right in the United States to form a labor union. That's a protected right. There's a concept called protected concerted activity, which is if you're fighting for better conditions, not just for yourself, but for at least one other coworker as a group, it's considered protected concerted activity. If your boss fires you for it, you're entitled to back pay. It's an unfair labor practice. So, people need to know their rights and to spread information about that. And as we get those numbers up and people, fight in an organized, effective manner, that's when you'll see the left politics coming together. And in the meantime, we're going to get kind of goofy stuff like Cornel West looking like the, so far the presumptive candidate for the biggest kind of left party in the U.S., the Green Party U.S., his only challenger in the Green Party primaries, which aren't technically taking place until next summer. So I mean, we got a whole year to go. I do hope that somebody, a labor leader, somebody comes along and challenges West, because I think he's not really the best candidate that the left should be able to come up with, at least as a representative. And the bourgeois elections, I had some weirdo on Bluesky like aggressively, quote tweet in a hostile way because I had mentioned the bourgeois elections. I said something effective. As a communist, I think that the Green Party U.S. should be able to come up with a better candidate than Cornel West, or at least needs to be able to develop this capacity in a rapid manner. But that being said, this was in response to something Status Quo posted about Cornel West going on the Anderson Cooper show, and Democrats freaking out. In the name of democracy, they're freaking out over candidates entering a free election. It's just astounding. But anyway, while I don't think Cornel West is the best candidate that the left could come up with, and I actually think he's a step backward from Bernie Sanders, for all of the flaws of Bernie Sanders, I actually think West is kind of a step backwards. I still appreciate the Democrats freaking out, for a reason like this. Somebody was like, "This is opportunist, don't be this person." What the fuck is this? Weird shit going on out there, people. So anyway, those are some thoughts off the top of my head. So Bluesky and Mastodon, that's where I'm posting now. Pinned Twitter post is really just a link to the other places that I am online, Reddit and SoundCloud and all that other stuff. So before we get into the chat or anything like that today, let's see what has been posted on the channel recently. So we did do the office hours streams from June 22nd and July 8th. Those were posted about 2 weeks ago. I also reposted Lenin's What Is to Be Done, major text, almost 7 hours long. It's in the Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide playlist. By the way, if you're somebody who's new to the channel and new to Marxism and you don't know where to begin reading, go to the playlists tab at the Socialism for All YouTube. Also up on the SoundCloud, we have some pinned lists, although really just they only let you pin 4, and I just have the basic Marxism-Leninism playlist. I haven't come up with my own recommended reading list, but for now, we do have a number of recommended reading lists and syllabi from parties that they recommend. Like if you're going to join their party, what do they want you to read? We have Hakim's Basic Marxism-Leninism Reading List, the Marxist-Leninist Reading Hub Curriculum, Politsturm International's Recommended Marxism-Leninism Reading List. What else do we have? The Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide, which is from Movimiento Anti-Imperialista, MAI. This is posted on R-Communism on Reddit. This is actually what kind of forms the backbone of this channel. There's only 26 texts on that, and I still have 3 to go. In the meantime, we've read literally over like 300 other texts, but that formed the skeleton for us to branch out into many other texts, was that basic Marxism-Leninism study guide, and what is to be done is on there. There's also the American Party of Labor's reading list. There's a few other things. So anyway, if you're looking for something to just get started with, look at the playlists tab, and then just scroll down. The first thing is Marxist-Leninist reading lists, party curricula and syllabi, and other recommended theory collections. I want to mention that I refer to this channel and myself as, well, I'm a U.S. American, that's just where I was born and where I still live, studying Marxism, but specifically anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism. People who are very new may not be familiar with the term revisionist, but this is pretty much since the beginning of Marxism. There have been distorters of Marxism that have tried to revise major theses, such as revolution or class struggle or whatever, about, Marx and Engels' core writings. They've tried to revise them. So revisionism is major departures, critical departures that completely undermine Marxism or Marxism-Leninism. And so what is anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism? So there are a number of major turns in the 20th century where people feel that the movement went revisionist, or that socialist projects went revisionist and departed from the path of building socialism and using Marxist-Leninist techniques and theory and applying what would actually work. So widely regarded that the USSR after Stalin went revisionist. This was modern revisionism or Khrushchevite revisionism. And, of course, Trotskyists will consider Stalin to be a departure, major departure, even counter-revolution. We're not Trotskyist here. And then also after Mao, or even in the last few years of Mao, in the 1970s, that China, with its capitalist reforms and opening up in 1978 in particular, went revisionist under the rule of Deng Xiaoping. You might see online as Dengism. It's pronounced Deng, but so there's a couple of different turns. So some of the major anti-revisionist currents are Marxism-Leninism, Maoism. I don't consider myself currently a Marxist-Leninist Maoist, although I have yet to read any MLM pieces that I really seriously disagree with, so I'm very friendly to it. You also have something like Enver Hoxha, considered anti-revisionist of Albania, who first criticized the USSR for being revisionist and then later criticized late Mao, post-Mao China for being revisionist as well. So there are some differences between, for example, like a Hoxhaist perspective and an MLM perspective. That's something that I'd like to get into evaluating a little bit more closely later in the channel. There's still a lot of readings that I'd like to get to first. But yeah, so anti-revisionism matters. There's a lot of people who do uphold, China's capitalism. China's very dubious capitalism, allowing large amounts of capitalism, on a very long-term, multi-decades, half a century basis. A lot of people, I think, rightly are very skeptical of that, and so on. Whereas a lot of Marxist-Leninists who have not adopted a specifically anti-revisionist position, I mean, they might consider themselves anti-revisionist in one way or another, do not criticize China in that way and tend to be very, very uncritical of modern China in a way that is, almost comical sometimes. But anyway, what is to be done? I was talking about. I reposted what is to be done with a minor edit, very slight edit. You probably wouldn't notice it. But there was something I just wanted to edit that always bugged me in that audiobook. And although YouTube has an online editing feature, this was over the length limit. So I actually had to do it offline and then re-upload. And anyway, that's why that got posted. What else? So we've been doing a series on socialism and religion. So the texts in that series so far, some better known, some lesser known. Engels' Continental Socialism, Marx's Anti-Church Movement Demonstration in Hyde Park, Engels' Bruno Bauer and Early Christianity, Engels' The Book of Revelation, Engels' The Program of the Blancist Fugitives from the Paris Commune, Engels and pre-renegade Karl Kautsky, Lawyers' Socialism, an excerpt from that, Rosa Luxemburg's An Anti-Clerical Policy of Socialism, and Rosa Luxemburg's Socialism in the Churches. I have 3 more texts I plan to put up. Birdie recorded one of them. I just didn't have time to upload it yet. All 3 of them are from Lenin in the late 1900s, so like 1909 and into the teens. A few more texts about religion and the class struggle. And as I said at the end of the last one that is on the channel right now, Socialism in the Churches by Rosa Luxemburg, which, by the way, is a fantastic hour-long exposition of the history of the Christian church way back to the early days, like 100 AD, like very, very early Christians, which Engels also covers in Bruno Bauer and Early Christianity in the Book of Revelation. Anyway, she takes it from, the very early days of Christianity and its various mutations over the centuries into the very, very oppressive and exploitative force that it became under feudalism and continues to be in capitalism. So, yeah, it is a somewhat secondary question, religion, but it is an important one. I mean, Marx had, these weren't the first texts that we've done on the subject of religion. There was also by Lenin, Socialism and Religion, the Attitude of the Workers' Party to Religion. There's also Marx's very famous quote about a religion being the opium of the masses or the opium of the people. That's from the Introduction to a Contribution to the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. I love that text. It's from 1844 by Marx. And there's a lot of religion apologists that try to take one isolated line from that and say that, Marx acknowledges that religion is like the sigh of the oppressed, but the overwhelming thrust of that text is that workers must shake off religion in favor of philosophy if they're to, become fully upright and fight for their humanity. That's like really the overall thrust of the text. And while there is that one line in there, he's acknowledging people aren't being religious, or many people at least, aren't being religious just because they're purely ignorant. It's because oppression and exploitation are hard to bear. However, until, it's religion that provides a kind of false happiness, an illusory happiness. And what socialism is demanding is real happiness, so the people don't need religion. And as I was commenting at the end of Socialism in the Churches, I've found that even Lenin, and this stood out to me because I don't usually find Lenin in any way not consistent, but even Lenin, who, draws a very clear picture with, as far as policies of religion, that religion, as far as the state is concerned under socialism, is to be a private and personal matter. That said, socialism is also for complete separation of church and state, that churches, religious institutions and authorities get no privileges, no funding, nothing like that. So it's just a personal matter. In practice, religion has also been very counter-revolutionary and has been political in that way. And various actions have been taken by socialist authorities with good reason against religious bodies that are actually organized in society. Even if they're not getting funding from the state and things like that, they can still pose a counter-revolutionary danger. So there is that. And, as I mentioned, I don't know if this is just sort of the difference of the rhetoric that had to be used in the 1900s and 19-teens versus, what may be more common knowledge today, a century later, especially after, the demonstrated history of religious struggle, or at least religious veiled struggle against socialism in any form, or even progressive movements in most forms. But so while that's the policy in relation to the state, they make clear that in relation to the party, to the Communist Party, to the Workers' Party, religion is not a private matter. That actually is very much the concern of the party, which is Marxist, which means materialism, which means a positive hostility towards religious superstition and idealism and illusions of all kinds. Because that really is going to cloud your thinking when it comes to social matters. You can't, in other words, both believe in material, rational explanations for what happens in this physical world, which is materialism, and also that immaterial beings rule and influence the world. Those are logically incompatible concepts. But, there's this point made that they would let people join the Workers' Party who had religious views as long as they weren't too loud about them, and they agreed to spread the Marxist doctrine and materialism and things like that. It makes you wonder, though, at what point, and again, this is a secondary or even lesser question, but it makes you wonder at what point are people really still holding on to those views, outwardly agreeing to promote materialism and things like that, but harboring counter-revolutionary, idealist, superstitious sentiment, that they're concealing. So that to me is a piece that stood out for its sort of lack of consistency, and you get it. But I think that this is a question that is interesting to me because it's one of the ones that I don't think socialism has fully solved in like a truly satisfying way. And to this day, I think about 80% of people get this right. There's about 20% of people who seem to be very touchy about it, really do want to import their religious sentiment into Marxism in some way. And I don't know, so it continues to be a problem. And they'll make arguments like, coming down too hard on religion just gives fodder to the right-wingers. This is in some ways no different from we just can't make the right-wingers mad that you see in so many other kinds of opportunist, nationalist sentiment, anti-bigotry sentiment, and so on. So to me, that's like a little bit of a gray area that I'm still looking for a good theoretical and practical resolution to. Just a topic of interest to me before I was interested in socialism. Was interested in philosophical and for me it was kind of becoming interested in sociology, which I really didn't know existed for. It's not like a real popular topic in the U.S. in general. I really never heard of sociology at all in high school. So it's like if you're interested in social problems, social questions, you're looking at philosophy, you're looking at religion, you're looking at political science. It's of some outstanding interest to me. Well, how do socialists answer this question? And so that's why we've been exploring that at such length. Let me take a sip here. Anyway, like I said, 3 more Lenin texts on this little mini-series. Then we're switching, I think, into a fairly long Rosa Luxemburg. Going to do a whole lot of Luxemburg readings, most of them quite short, starting with Reform or Revolution. So anyway, that's what's new as far as the videos, what's new on the community tab. I did write a little essay about basically what I was just talking about religion. Also did some criticism of Cornel West. I mean, this was part 4 basically in an ongoing criticism of what I said before. Just like, really, is Cornel West the best that the Green Party can come up with? Please, these left celebrity vanity campaigns. It's just, we need to do better. We probably will do better, again, with a stronger labor movement, generating labor leaders who historically have been socialist leaders and things like that. In the meantime, I think we're in somewhat sorry shape. And, just the Green Party being, which I think has potential to be a member in, a kind of Congress, or I've referred to a left coalition. I was talking with a comrade the other day that said coalition is probably, and why a coalition in the first place? Because none of these parties Green, Communist Party USA, Socialist Party USA, PSL, whatever, none of them are big enough on their own. I don't think any of them are the vanguard party. Not all of them are trying to be the vanguard party, but even the ones that are trying to be a vanguard type party, none of them are big enough. It probably would take some sort of collaboration. And I've used the term and hashtag LeftCoalition to try to promote this idea. I have also talked about this in previous live streams, if you go back and look at that. But I was talking with a comrade the other day that was suggesting the term Congress instead of coalition because it implies more of a sort of strict internal governance, which in fact was what I had intended and in my discussions of the left coalition idea, that you would have an internal governance to this coalition, that it would be kind of a parliamentary style thing where the different parties send representatives and things like that. But, left Congress or, workers Congress or something like that, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I do think that the Greens could potentially, have a place in something like that. It's kind of up to them. What do they want their party to be? Do they want it to just be a ballot line that they loan out to left celebrities for, protest vote vanity campaigns? Or do they want to, highlight the on the ground work that the party's doing? Because I know in the past, for example, Sherry Honkala, Honkala, was, I think, the two-time Green Party vice presidential candidate in 2012 and 2016, I think. And, she's a anti-poverty activist who has done kind of like real work on the ground. And anyway, people have been a part of this party and have tried to build it up and have tried to do real work in the communities, making the party a part of working people's lives there. I mean, ultimately what the party needs, like any left party or would-be left party, is closer ties to the labor movement and daily organizing in every working class community in the country around fundamental issues that people are facing. What you're getting instead is the potential for these kind of PR stunt, throwaway, self-congratulatory media hype campaigns, which may result in higher speaking fees and book sales for West or whoever it is. But that kind of thing is divorced from most people's reality. It's alienating to behold, and it's probably likely to be met with contempt. So yeah, I mean, those things rely on sort of left Twitter, progressive Twitter, the Kyle Kalinske set, the people who watch, the Hill Rising, stuff like that. As one person summed it up, people whose entire political education was reading, what's the name of the book, the Chomsky thing, Manufacturing Consent. There we go. Screwed that one up good. Anyway, yeah, what that's probably going to do, rather than building something up from the grassroots of America, is going to attract, like flies, grifters of the Jimmy Dore type. And we already see that happening with the Cornel West campaign, and that's not a very good thing. So again, your party needs ties to the masses and the labor movement, organized labor in particular. We have to pry labor away from the Democratic Party, and those that won't be pried away from the Democratic Party have to be labeled as sellouts and unions that don't really fight for the people. So anyway, what else did we have on here? I do encourage people to read that. It's the one that starts with Cornel West should be running in the Democratic Party primary because he sucks, just like any other Democrat. Anyway, a few days ago I posted a piece about Eliezer Yudkowsky's TED Talk, which was like 2 weeks ago, his TED Talk, that is, and talking some more about AI. We're going to be doing another stream on Thursday, so that's the 27th. Same time as always, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. GMT UTC, and I actually want to read some more things about this. We covered, I think it was in live streams like 97, 98, or 99, some of the most recent live streams, things about existential threats from AI. Of course, in the short term, AI is not that developed. GPT-4 shows concerning advances, like leaps in performance over GPT-3, which caught safety experts such as Eliezer Yudkowsky by surprise and caused him to sound the alarm that by the time we get to GPT-6, this thing could have capabilities that would just not be controllable anymore. In the meantime, though, the GPT-4 that we're facing is already somewhat, human level at least, although much, much, much faster than human level in terms of intelligence. And that's a topic in the Hollywood writers' strike, because already the AI technology is being used to disrupt, a number of tasks that are already going on. A GPT-5 would be able to be much, much more disruptive in terms of putting people out of work. Of course, under capitalism, that leisure gets only distributed to the people who own the technology, which is the capitalist class, and the rest of us are going to be, fighting over garbage fires, and it's not a good thing. But anyway, there is this question of the long-term development of AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is superior to human in every way. In every measurable metric of human intelligence, it would be able to outperform. And I've linked things about this in the past. It is something that I think is hugely concerning. And if people aren't trying to, I saw some people in the comments, rather stupidly, I thought, just saying, oh, it's just a tool. No, you're not understanding what we're talking about. AI is fundamentally different from any other technology in that other technologies, a hammer, a hydraulic press, don't really make decisions. This could, and we're on the threshold of it being able to make more intelligent decisions in pursuit of various goals more effectively than the average human, and possibly of any human. That no human innate natural intelligence would be able to outthink it. That puts us in a literally historically unprecedented situation, and we have no idea what would happen after that. I will read this essay as well as some follow-up texts in the next live stream, which will be, I think, a numbered number 101. Yesterday we posted something about, this is from This Week in Virology, Microbe TV, another YouTube channel, discussing why RFK Jr.'s main talking points about vaccines, as shared on the Joe Rogan Show and elsewhere, are factually wrong. And that about brings us up to date, so we'll jump into the chat in a minute. I just wanted to say about the AI, people saying, oh, it's just a tool, like it's chatbots aren't going to ruin the world. I mean, you just didn't read what I wrote. You just didn't read what I wrote, because I accounted for all of that, and that's really not the concern that anyone is saying. No one thinks ChatGPT is going to turn into the Terminator. The problem is that GPT-4 showed wild advances over GPT-3. GPT-5 could show, I've seen papers that argue that what seem to be emergent capabilities are not actually emergent capabilities. I think this may be the wrong question, because the question is, at the end of the day, what can it do? But anyway, the point is that you throw enough tech into the AI hardware, suddenly, boom, it can do things like learn languages it wasn't taught that no one predicted, and we have no understanding of why it's doing the things that it's doing. So, we know that it lies to people. It returns information that it knows is incorrect and we know is incorrect. We still don't really know whether it's doing that deliberately all the time, and so on. So there's just a lot of things, and the capitalists will be putting that stuff into critical things. I mean, Elon, quote, I got rid of the bots, Musk, over on Twitter, part of this new X rebranding marketing push, which he wants to replace banking functions. It's this wild pipe dream he's got. Probably it's going to wind up in bankruptcy, but his new Twitter X thing is going to be driven by AI. That's Elon Musk, who's one of the signatories of the Don't Develop AI Anymore, which is a bunch of horse shit. It's completely shallow and insincere. The new Twitter X is going to be run by AI. That's one of his marketing pushes for it. So yeah, anyway, as somebody said on Blue Sky, no, I won't be sharing my banking information with the Death Threats website. All right. Enough of that. Let's get into the chat. We do have about 36 people here. And let's see what they are talking about. I had to stop my listening of Stalin's Concerning Questions of Leninism to listen to the stream. That's a banger. I'm happy to have a new stream. Well, welcome, and I'm glad that you are learning about socialist communist history. That's great. I'm goofing off at work. That's a good thing to do at work. Remember, capitalism, as we discussed in the audiobook of Value, Price, and Profit, also published, I think, in German as Wages, Price, and Profit by Marx, which is now one of the pinned texts for people who are subscribed to the channel. Capitalism, where do profits come from? Profits in capitalism come from hidden, unpaid work that's built into the workday. In essence, in order to get the privilege of generating enough value to pay your wages that you can cover your basic living expenses as a worker, the trade-off is you have to work unpaid time for the capitalist. What do I mean unpaid time? Well, we're not talking about wage theft in the strict sense, like you worked 4 hours, like you punched in at 8 a.m., punched out at 12 noon, and you only got paid for 3 hours. That's not what we mean. It means that the hourly wage you got paid was far short of the value that you generated. And so, but that's the price of admission. Those are the terms of admission into any capitalist workplace, that you have to give the capitalist free product that you just don't get compensated for. So yeah, goof off at work rather than, after you've covered the basic amount of labor that you have to, the necessary labor that you have to perform to cover your basic expenses, you have no reason to do anything but goof off, really. And that's the capitalist's problem at that point. Did you see Burkina Faso cutting ties with France? I thought I saw something about that a little while ago, although I have not seen any details yet. As I mentioned, I'm off the Twitter, so I'm not drinking from quite as stout a fire hose as I was news-wise right now, which is also why my mood is a bit more level. Twitter really can do a number on people's psychology, for sure. But yeah, like I said, unfortunately, there's not as much... Whoa. So I almost trip over my mouse. Yeah, there's not as much left-wing news over on Bluesky, so more people have to get invite codes, and we got to change that. But no, I'm a little bit news deficient right now. Making up for it in the audiobooks, but yeah. I find it telling that there was so much anti-Stalin propaganda. I can only assume that there was so much because he wasn't revisionist and had the power to destroy the Nazis. I'm really liking the Stalin stuff. Thanks, S4A. I will say about Stalin, the mid to late 1930s were a very turbulent time in the USSR, and I do think mistakes were made. They were trying to deal with a lot of different, very serious problems, which were dealt with. I do think some of the baby went out with the bathwater in some cases. This was, on the other hand, the first socialist state in history, and they were only about 2 decades into existing. So I think it's understandable that some mistakes were made. But yeah, anyway, I mean, so there are people who have bones to pick with Stalin that conversely throw away the entire legacy of Stalin because, something something they didn't like was done during that time, even though like the overall project of the USSR was preserved, and so on. I think that there are valid criticisms, and I think that there's also lots of valid praise to be, heaped in the situation that they were in. Massively underdeveloped industrially, facing war, facing threat of more war. It was not the ideal time for development. But like I said, I think at the same time, particularly like in the realm of science, there was some not so great things that got promoted and some great things that did get banned or suppressed. So, it is a mixed bag, but overall, the bag remained in the end, which I think at that point was kind of the key thing. So yeah, I mean, and I think you can read, Stalin doesn't present himself as a major theorist of Marxism-Leninism. As he himself says, he's just a student of Lenin and he hopes to be a worthy student. Lenin died really young, I think he was 53, he was in his early 50s, and he died of basically stroke-related complications. It was, my understanding is the same way that his father died, so I guess it ran in the family. Very unfortunate. Who knows? I mean, I'm not saying that all of the problems would have been averted had Lenin stuck around. I think that that's a mistake that people make. But it would have been interesting to see Lenin's perspective on, the major crises that broke out, particularly in the 30s. I'm not saying that they would have been avoided, but I would have been interested in his position on some of that stuff. Because, Trotsky in particular was a very major figure, and we will be doing a series of Trotsky versus Stalin type things with some Bukharin thrown in, and the period of Stalin consolidating power against a lot of the other old Bolsheviks, and Trotsky of course was like the major figure in the sort of anti-Stalin world there. And we will do, just to help people understand this better, Trotsky's writings versus Stalin's perspective and writings from the same period. That'll be probably not for a few months, but I actually finally lined up the texts in order. Part of the issue there is Trotsky writes such fucking long texts. Like he wrote a lot of very, very long books, but trying to pick through and find the most critical ones. But anyway, would have been interesting because Lenin started out extremely critical of Trotsky, who was a Menshevik and kind of just a wacky one at that. As late as 1914 and later, Lenin was writing kind of lengthy criticisms, really excoriating Trotsky for just kind of general Menshevik bullshit. Trotsky did come over, as did some other Mensheviks like Kollontai, kind of late, 1917-ish, and played a crucial role in the revolution. Trotsky with the Red Army, for example. And Lenin, of course, found a lot more to praise about Trotsky at that time. That said, he did continue to criticize him. There's a couple of significant pieces on Trotsky's mistakes. But it would have been interesting to see, I think, Lenin's perspective on the 30s. Of course, we'll never really get it. All right, anyway. Big news just broke maybe 2 hours ago. Teamsters and UPS came to an agreement, mentioning that. My understanding is that the union got everything that they were asking for in the contract. But anyway, some things I wish would have been touched on more were things like the gig workers being contracted out and part-timers using their personal vehicles for deliveries. But it's still a massive win, and I'm proud of my fellow Teamsters, and it's a celebratory moment. Absolutely. As the working class fights, again out of desperation, for workers' power, we will see that power coming to the fore, and it will spread like wildfire. So again, if you're a friend of the working class, spread news on these victories, celebrate them in every way that you can. Insane that they had to do this much just to get fucking AC in their trucks. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's wild situations that the company was putting them in. Meanwhile, Texas construction workers are losing water privileges. Yeah, I was watching there was a Democracy Now! Video that YouTube was just recommending to me like every fucking time that I went on the site. It's called The Heat Will Kill You First. It was like a 20-minute interview with a guy who wrote a book about climate change, a journalist covering climate change. They mentioned that in there, that there was a bill passed that basically now local municipalities can't prevent companies from refusing to give their workers. People are working in like 105 degree, 110 degree heat. They can't take water or shade breaks. People are going to die from that. So, yeah. A little bit of discussion here about the U.S. soldier in the DPRK, North Korea. Apparently, I didn't follow the details of that either. Apparently, there's not like a lot to hail there from a socialist point of view. He was kind of just like seeking refuge from something not that good. So I'm not sure. I haven't really read the details on that. Yeah, X.com was Musk's first company before merging and becoming part of the PayPal mafia. Internet History X, Apartheid History X. There you go. Tragicomedy. It can't be a coincidence that Musk's rival owns the X trademark. Yeah, there's something weird going on there between Musk and Zuck. And like they were talking about having like a cage match recently. This was like 2 weeks ago, maybe. They were talking about having a cage match. And then Jordan Peterson weighed in with like, ooh, will they be nude and oiled up? It was like, aren't you the fedora guy? But anyway. Who needs Twitter bots when people are paid to act like AI on TikTok? Yeah, I don't even go on TikTok. It's just I have enough to deal with. I have enough to deal with without getting into like, as I've mentioned multiple times, I find TikTok videos just like sensory overload, information overload. Like because of the shorter duration of the videos, they're just overwhelming. It's like I said, it's like you press a button, the wall goes down, and like somebody just throws shit at you for like 2 or 3 minutes straight, and then the wall goes back up. It's just unnerving. Like I can't actually watch those and concentrate, focus on what's being said. It's just too much. So yeah, not a fan of that format myself. I also, if I may just take a moment, and of course I may, to just rant about YouTube Shorts. I hate how they loop, and you can't tell sometimes until you're halfway through the second loop that it's looped. I don't like that you can't fast forward and rewind in them. I don't really like anything about them. Just make a fucking video. Like, I don't get this short form content so much. It's not sufficient time to really develop an idea. I just find it irritating. It's part of things that are just more and more irritating to me about using the internet in the 2020s versus like even the 2010s. So anyway, I know that there's some good information on TikTok. Just wish it was in a different format personally. I watched Marianne Williamson on Hassan's stream. Oh boy. Yeah, again, like I said, speaking fees and book sales. Marianne Williamson is on a book tour disguised as a presidential run. She was an absolute joke. I watched that piece on his YouTube channel, and I don't know what was more silly, her or the comments, Williamson 2024. But she's better than Joe Biden. Fucking like, a bug crawling across your carpet is better than Joe Biden. That doesn't mean she's a serious person or, has any real political solutions to offer. I can't view Twitter because I don't have an account. Yeah, they also recently, this was after the bandwidth debacle earlier this month, they made it so that just like Facebook, you can't view pages without being logged in with an account, which is only going to kill the site more. So yeah. People I normally respect really seem to be on the Cornel West train. Well, it's a sign of political immaturity. This is the left not knowing its own strength, not knowing the stakes of the situation that they're in. It's a lot of naivete, I think, that get people on this very idealistic media grifter train like that. So, when in the title of the Lenin book, quote, left-wing communism, left-wing being in quotes because it's not really left-wing, an infantile disorder. The infantile disorder means political immaturity. That's what it means. It means people who have not really thought through all of the problems and so on. And I think you have a very naive U.S. left at this point that thinks that, getting general strike trending as a hashtag is like how you organize a general strike. Not even close. But that's kind of the place that we're in and will be in, again, until we actually have more people out there fighting battles, winning and or in the early days more likely losing them, and then licking their wounds, learning from their mistakes, looking to history and theory, which is exactly what I did. I was a little bit ahead of the curve as far as the labor revival and was getting into that sort of back in the Occupy days. And happy to see that going more mainstream now. But, after going through that and wading through the sort of anarcho-communist stuff, which I was just discussing this with somebody on Bluesky, and they made a point to me. We're discussing like anarchism and anarcho-communism, and they made a point to me that anarcho-communism is, quote, great because it's different, and this is like a Richard Wolff sort of talking point. It's great because it's different from the, quote, state communism that there's so much Cold War propaganda against. And I said, yeah, but it's not really effective. Has no like real track record of working, which is why they didn't bother making propaganda against it. And really all that means is, well, okay, so you got to have this ANCOM phase first before you realize that that's kind of futile, and you start wondering, well, how do anarchists actually take power? And then you just either wind up reinventing Marxism or you just go back and read Marxism. That you have to have this phase first just speaks to the fact of how effective the Cold War propaganda, anti-communist propaganda was, that people interested in communism have to have this half-communist phase, and it is literally half-communist, it's anarcho-communist. You have to have a half-communist phase for a few years before you can get to the real deal. What if that wasn't the case? So I don't actually see that as a huge win. For people who are confused about that, the Marxist understanding of anarchism, and remember, anarchism is not new. It's as old as Marxism, and Marx and Engels criticized it at the time in the mid-19th century. Proudhon, Bakunin, and so on, Kropotkin. So, we have a thing up on the channel about the Bakuninists at work in Spain, how anarchists completely fucked up the circa 1870 revolution in Spain. And, the Marxist understanding is that anarchism is basically a petty bourgeois ideology that puts the individual above the class. In other words, Marxism does seek, as Stalin explains in Anarchism or Socialism, Marxism does seek liberation of the individual, but through liberation of the class to which the individual belongs, the proletariat. Whereas anarchism does not do this and just seeks liberation of the individual, and hence petty bourgeois individualistic philosophy. But it makes sense that the U.S. is so riddled with anarchism, and Western Europe as well, the advanced capitalist countries, because in those countries you have a bourgeoisified population of mostly proletarians. U.S. is 90% plus proletarian, but who have false petty bourgeois consciousness that does not match their actual class status. So they have the class status of a proletarian, but they're carrying around the ideology of a different class, the petty bourgeoisie, because everybody thinks that they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires, going to make it rich. Or even if they don't think that, they're still thinking in the limited terms of sort of bourgeois individualism, but of course minus the money and the capital that actually goes with that class status. So yeah, it makes sense that anarchism is so pervasive because petty bourgeois consciousness is very pervasive. That can be defeated through extensive labor organizing and so on as the class consciousness grows. But yeah, for the time being, but again, I don't consider it a win. I consider it sort of sickly half-communist ideology. On a scale from 1 to 10 as an agitator, how would you rate Michael Parenti? I don't know. I mean, I mainly know him as an author. I don't really like his speeches. I feel like he's sort of in his speeches putting on airs of like waving his arms around a lot, and it feels like a bit of a LARP, just his speech style. I think he was sincere in his socialism and in his scholarship and educational efforts about socialism. So I'm not trying to, fight him on his politics. But it seemed to me like he was, I don't know, like trying to imitate Castro or something, and it just came off as kind of phony. So, I mean, as an agitator, I don't know. Black Shirts and Reds, though, we did do on the channel with commentary. Just got a comment. Somebody said it's the first audiobook they've ever actually finished in their life, and the commentary helped them stay engaged. Some people don't like the commentary, and you know what? You're welcome to do. First of all, here's a full refund. And second of all, that's just the way that we do them here. You're welcome to do them without commentary on your own channel if you would like. But that's the way that we do them, because it is more of a discussion group type of thing where we try to digest it, and I try to make it accessible to people who might just be jumping in on that. You know, there's this stereotype of theory of being dry, inaccessible, and, just incomprehensible to people who haven't been initiated into it. And I like to sort of provide that initiation wherever possible in most of the texts, if not all of them. Sometimes I don't do comments, and I really wish people would stop commenting. Wish there was commentary in this one. Yeah, well, if I don't think of anything to say, then I don't say anything. I don't force commentary for its own sake. I just want people to understand that. If I think something speaks for itself, then I would be detracting from it by adding to it, if you get my meaning. So as an agitator specifically, I don't know if there's something specific you had in mind, but I think he wrote good books that are popular and have good information and are readable. So if you consider the books agitation, then I'd rate him pretty favorably. I mean, he's well known, and I think generally well regarded for his work, and I concur with that. I've never had Twitter, so I didn't know you had to have an account to view. Well, you didn't until a few weeks ago. For what it's worth, Parenti is partially responsible for one commenter becoming a socialist. Yeah, absolutely. Another commenter, been loving this atheist stuff. I think it's important to understand, and as I mentioned in the little essay, there's been a lot of backsliding into various kinds of, nationalism, sexism, bigotry of various kinds. Like, let's not put backsliding into like, oh yeah, religion's great, into our Marxism. That's not, again, it's not the primary thing, but that doesn't mean that you can just like let it go and take like anti-Marxist positions on it. Lenin makes the point that we do need to fight it, not idealistically, but primarily materially by changing conditions. But there's, again, a contradiction there in it's also held that the party needs to be atheistic and materialist. Okay, well, unless we're expecting that to just sort of spontaneously happen, then, you do need to put propaganda out there in favor of that as well. And I think it is that the balance was never gotten exactly right. Either that or maybe the balance was gotten right, but just too much attention was given to the people continuing to whine about it. Anyway, like I said, we'll continue with that. I got 3 more texts and then we're changing topics. So, if you've loved it, good. There's 11 things up there. I also made a playlist, Socialism and Religion. If you didn't love it, it's not the last thing we're going to cover on the channel. All right. Religion can pose a counter-revolutionary danger. See Operation Paperclip. Now, Paperclip was bringing the Nazis over. Why are you linking religion to that? I'm just not aware of the connection. Getting double time in the factory while listening. There you go. Thumbs up to that. Yeah, speaking of the mid to late 30s, the Finnish Bolshevik has a good series on the Moscow trials. Yeah, I know Stalin died in his 70s. I did mean Lenin. Did I say Stalin? Lenin died in his early 50s, like way earlier than would be expected. I have watched at least part of that Finnish Bolshevik series on the Moscow trials. I think it's 3 videos. I can't remember if I finished the whole thing or not. I may have. But I think that the thing that stood out that people were remarking on was the Trotskyists tried to make it out like they just didn't really get a fair hearing and so on. The reality was that the party actually did listen to them for like a surprisingly long period of time. So anyway, that was one of my main takeaways. What's up with Trotsky being a possible Nazi collaborator? Yeah, I've heard that as well. I haven't really gone into that. I mean, I made up my mind. I'm not interested in Trotskyism, and I've heard that allegation. I don't know of the details on it. Somebody says socialism. Socialism, I thought that wasn't relevant anymore. Well, we still live in capitalism, which is a system of class rule that is ruled over by a tiny minority of people who extract wealth out of the overwhelming majority of the population, another class, the proletariat, and there's going to be conflict between those classes for as long as this minoritarian system of rule and exploitation persists. So no, that's definitely relevant. Yeah. Is the union fighting for the gig workers to pay less taxes? Because I work Instacart and DoorDash, and I hate those taxes I have to pay. They're way too high. I don't know anything about that. But as far as what we're talking about with class struggle, taxes sometimes figure into that. Our main concern, usually the taxes, more of a bourgeois, petty bourgeois complaint, that too much is being taken out of their profits. Anyway, it's kind of amazing how people pick up these talking points, but it's more of a libertarian talking point. What we're talking about is surplus value extraction, the exploitation of workers by the employer. So like when you work Instacart and DoorDash, you're basically providing services that were outsourced to you, by various companies, rather than treating you as like a proper employee with all the rights that go along with that, and strengthening you in a position to work and eventually fight alongside other proletarians. You are treated as this independent contractor, and it furthers the illusory petty bourgeois consciousness. You think you're sort of like a little businessman. You're not. You're an exploited worker, basically getting paid far less than the value you're generating. That theft, that exploitation is much greater in comparison to what's going on with the taxes. So that really should be your primary concern. Speaking of AC, I heard that only 30% of Texas prisons have AC, and people are dying of heat exhaustion in prison there. Yeah, I don't know what else to add, but yes, that's true. This is, of course, on the heels of COVID. So far, actually, that reminds me of COVID. We, so far, are having a lull in COVID. It's far from over, but we're having a lesser COVID year this year than we've had the last, at least last year. Let me bring up the current Biobot situation. But we are having a surge right now. Let me find the thing. Here we go. So this is from biobot.io, biobot.io/data. And this was just updated yesterday, July 24, from samples collected last week, the week of the 17th. So as you can see there, since January 2022, which is the big spike in the middle, you can see that the rest of 2022 had enormous amounts of SARS-2 virus being detected in the wastewater. So we had an enormous amount of cases of COVID that weren't being detected through tests necessarily, but you can see it easily through the wastewater. You're not going to get SARS-2 virus in the wastewater unless it's infecting people. So clear indication that last year we had a record amount of SARS-2 spreading. Those were the Omicron variants. Now what happened this winter is that the XBB strains became dominant. This was XBB.1.5 has been dominant, but then there's a lot of different mutations, variations of the XBB, which all of them are like 8 to 15% dominance and it's varying. So there's not like one particular variant that is outshining them all and driving a huge wave. So what we've had for like the last 6 months is a fairly sustained, well, not 6 months, but 4 months maybe, a sustained lull. However, even that lull is much higher than the lull that we had in 2020 and the lull that we had in 2021 and the lull that we had briefly in early spring, late winter 2022. So as lulls go, it is the highest lull that we've had. Then if we zoom in a little bit more closely on what's going on currently with the Biobot, bring this up. There we go. So here's the last 6 months. You can see it's kind of leveling off again for the moment, but there was an uptick. So we are at about 250, 260 copies of virus per milliliter of sewage. That's well above, like I said, the 2020 or 2021 lulls, which were more like 100. So we're like double the resting level of COVID that we were at 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So much more COVID is circulating. Now, we do see that there was an uptick recently. Not that surprising. I think that this is maybe putting us onto a similar pattern to what we saw in 2021, where the Delta strain came in. But again, none of these XBB strains is leading like a super breakout wave. But if we zoom in a little bit more, oh, did I not get the zoom in? Tell me I didn't get the zoom in. This is the regional one. Oh, yeah, I didn't get it. That's a shame. Okay. Well, anyways, you can see this map, monitoring by region, breaks it down. The orange is the Northeast, which historically has been leading most of the waves. And then the Southeast being pink. You have to take my word on this because I didn't get the graphic. But those two regions are still ticking up. I think that the Northeast is around 350 copies. Right now, the West and the Midwest, the green and purple regions, are declining slightly after rising, then plateauing. They're declining slightly for the moment, but the Southeast and the Northeast are rising, driving that wave that we saw again on the overall. I'll put the 6 month chart back up. Driving, yeah, that uptick that we've seen. The reason it leveled off is that the West and Midwest started to sink, canceling out in the national average, the Northeast and Southeast continuing to rise. But the Northeast and Southeast so far showing no signs of turning around, continuing to rise. So we may be looking at another wave. I think it's likely. But like I said, even as lulls go, this is not a particularly good lull because there's no masking. There's really no protections at this point. You'll go out in public, find maybe 1 in 100, 1 in 200 people actually masking. So anyway, just checking in on the COVID situation there for a minute. I thought of that because people have been dying in prison with total lack of COVID protections as well. Really brutal conditions in U.S. prisons in many, many different ways. If it's not the COVID, it's the heat. And I don't know, I'm at a loss for words as far as that there's not a bigger movement around that. Any kind of abolitionist work that you can get involved in, do see what you can do with that because it's, I don't know what else to say. All right, I know it's a bit off topic, but after the reading guides are complete, what's the future going to look like for the S4A channel? Also, another comment, Hassan sucks. Okay, so future of the S4A channel. I actually have really been consolidating the reading lists recently. Now, people are always suggesting other things, but I feel like for the first time, I've been working on my collection of offline audiobooks. It's another reason I love Marxist Internet Archive, by the way, despite that they are Trotskyist and they put in Trotskyist commentary all over the place. The website, being simple HTML, or sometimes it has like CSS and stuff like that, but it's at least not, real complicated formatting. It saves easily offline, and then I can just sort of go through and arrange my files, for when I do the recording. And sometimes I'll just spend hours doing this, like sizing up my files and being like, what kind of topics do I have here? What kind of series? What patterns jump out at me? What collections can I put together? And so on. So the basic Marxism-Leninism reading guide has really four more texts to it. Anti-During Part 2 by Engels, Capital Volume 1 by Marx, and Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism by Lenin. Then optionally, but I will be doing it, the Theory of Reconstitution of the Communist Party by Movimiento Anti-Imperialista. I feel like after doing their reading list, the least I can do is read that essay of theirs, get some of their thoughts in on this whole thing. But after that's done, there's a lot of other things to do. So off the top of my head, we're going to do a series on Rosa Luxemburg, little bit from Karl Liebknecht also. The two of them were organizers of the Spartacist League, and basically the attempt at a German revolution in 1919, or was it late 1918 to January 1919? Anyway, that one, those Spartacists. Mostly Rosa Luxemburg, though, in that collection, and then also Militarism and Anti-Militarism, I think, is the Karl Liebknecht text. So there's going to be at least a month, maybe 2 months worth of that. After some concluding texts there, and there's some tie-in, we'll do the Unionist pamphlet by Luxemburg, but then also Lenin's response to the Unionist pamphlet. And then some remembrances, like Clara Zetkin wrote a lot of remembrances of Rosa Luxemburg. We'll read some of those. But we're going to kind of do a Rosa Luxemburg section, and that'll be pretty much August and September, I think. After that, I'm going to come back to the basic Marxism-Leninism stuff. What I have there, in addition to Anti-During and Capital Volume 1, if you're going to do Capital Volume 1, might as well do Capital Volume 2, 3, and 4. And some related pieces around that. For example, Rosa Luxemburg, speaking of Rosa Luxemburg, also wrote her theory of the accumulation of capital, the anti-critiques, and going to read those as well as a couple of pieces about that, because she had her thoughts on the accumulation of capital, which turned out to be more controversial than she expected them to be, and things like that, that just tie in with capital. But also in that series, I have kind of a collection of texts which I think of as Marx and Engels non-economic texts. So there's kind of a lot of short, random pieces. Again, a few of them happen to be about religion, so I put them into a religion mini-series. But there was, that anti-church demonstration in Hyde Park thing from Marx, which is a 20-minute audiobook, but it's an interesting article that Marx wrote. There's a bunch of stuff like that, maybe 30 or 40 of those that are short Marx and Engels texts that you might not hear anywhere else. For example, people might know The Poverty of Philosophy by Marx, which is a big critique and almost satire and skewing of the philosophy of poverty. But there's a shorter piece on Proudhon by Marx as well, and we'll read that. I'm not going to bother with The Poverty of Philosophy at this time just because it's so long. Similarly, I'm not going to do The Holy Family because there is a mechanically read version of that, and it's 10 hours long. And it's okay, well, I just don't have 10 hours to spend on that when I could do 15, half an hour short things and with the same amount of effort. That I think more people will actually listen to and will get more out of anyway. So there's a whole series as we wrap up the Marx and Engels stuff, kind of 30 or 40 things there of shorter pieces. And then there will be the remembrances of Marx and Engels. Then we will move on to a lot of Lenin stuff that I have not read. significant Lenin pieces that people have probably seen if you're doing a fair amount of reading. There's a bunch of Lenin stuff that I want to get done. Again, probably not the real long stuff on these passes. There are some Lenin things that, what is it? The 1899 one. It's like the history of the development of capitalism in Russia or something like that. Looks very interesting. Again, there's a computer-read version. It's like 9 or 10 hours. So what I'm going to do on this pass is many shorter, that is up to about an hour and a half, texts from well-known people, Luxemburg, Lenin, Marx, and Engels, and then kind of cap that off for a while. From the Lenin stuff, and after remembrances of Lenin, Stalin's writing on the death of Lenin and stuff like that, going into that early USSR 20s and 30s period, the conflict between Trotsky and Stalin, and the general fight against, Bukharin and sort of others that were opposing Stalin at that time. Then a section on the Chinese Revolution, so a lot of Mao. I have another little mini-series that I will slip in somewhere, maybe at this point, maybe not, but which is just a number of texts on dialectical materialism by Cornforth, by David Guest, by Mao, by a lot of different people just happening to be writing on the subject of dialectics specifically. There turned out to be a lot of things in the collection that were kind of on this topic, so again, I made kind of a mini-series out of it, of maybe a dozen or 15 texts. I also have another collection of stuff that is pertaining to the USA, so there will be William Z. Foster, there will be Eugene Debs, and other things like that pertaining to socialist struggles in the US. The last few sections, and the reason I can recall these all off the top of my head is because I was numbering them, which really helps, because now I'm on number 7 in my head. Number 6 was the USA stuff. Number 7 was post-revolution China. Actually, a little bit of post-revolution China, but the main thrust of 7 was post-Stalin USSR. So basically the Khrushchev years and the Sino-Soviet split. So China's criticisms and Hoxha's and others' criticisms of post-Stalin USSR in the 50s and 60s. And just general criticisms and the fight against revisionism in the later 20th century USSR. Then some things on the Sino-Albanian split and criticisms of Dunga's Third World Theory, so kind of more the Hoxhist stuff, and some Marxist-Leninist Maoist stuff. Those are sections 8 and 9. So that's kind of what I've got. There's also a few other miscellaneous readings. We're also doing the Homeless Industrial Complex playlist, and the last one I put up was in March, and I really apologize. I'm wanting to do that. I'm stuck on a very long reading, and I just can't seem to get it done, and it's holding up the entire playlist. So yeah, Homeless Industrial Complex playlist will continue. I've got to just bite the bullet on that one. But see, it's hard for me too, because I feel like I'm constantly trying to keep the channel happy. And I feel like not posting for 2 weeks because I'm recording, an HIC reading isn't necessarily it, but I don't know how else to get these done. It's the same reason Anti-During got held up for so long too. So anyway, I think that there are years, there's at least 2 years, maybe 3, in what I was just, recounting there. And that's not even everything. That's not even all the major works. But what I think is that will take us about up to the 5-year mark for the channel. Probably after that, I might start doing more guides and things like that. In other words, I've been trying to teach theory from the perspective of annotated audiobooks. In other words, let's read it together and I'll explain it and you can kind of make your own notes. Probably after that point, after I've gone through a lot of the first 5 years of a lot of these primary readings, from then branching out into things we haven't done as much of, in particular, maybe doing some of, my own guides and breakdowns to particular topics. Now that, after having done all the reading, But also, I think getting into more history books, and I was mentioning this, I think, on the last stream, rather than just primary texts, reading and probably not doing audiobooks of, but doing reviews of and extensive sort of book reports, not just book reviews, but book reports on history books. Because the difference there, you might be asking what's the difference between a primary text and a history book, is that a primary text is, Lenin writing about his perspective on this and that. A history text will look at that same period of time and incorporate multiple sources, one of whom might be, Lenin, but many other sources. There's a historiographical method for constructing a historical narrative that incorporates multiple sources. And after getting through, a lot of the basic theory and reading those primary sources for 5 years, then getting into the history for maybe 5 years, because there have been many different histories of socialist and labor struggles written by both people sympathetic to, neutral to, or quote, neutral to, and hostile to proletarian victory and communism. So anyway, I hope that's sort of my rough sketch of 10 years of the channel divided of 5 years of primary stuff and reaction videos, and then 5 years of kind of more history and guides and writing more of my own stuff, I guess. But we'll see how it actually turns out. But yeah, I definitely have at least another year and a half of just primary stuff already lined up that I would like to read. And I will say also, it gets a bit frustrating for me sometimes doing the channel, putting up the audiobooks, and then seeing people, and I know there's just going to be unthinking people that do this regardless, but it does always bother me. People putting up comments where it's like, did you even listen to the text? People just oh yeah, Lenin said this, but I'm just going to wing it, based on nothing. They have no other evidence. They don't support another reasoning process, but they're just yeah, but whatever, we're going to do something else. And it's just are you here to study, or what's the deal? If you're going to put up a counter to it, at least provide some support for your position. It's just, I feel like I'm just making, things for just completely unthinking people when I get comments like that. It's frustrating. All right. Anarcho-communism is just another reaction against the history of socialism and labor around the world and even in America. I don't know if it's just another reaction, but it's not nearly as effective a way of struggle. I'm sure that some people do view it as something that they can weaponize. I do think other people honestly think that it's more liberating or something. I also honestly think those people are wrong, and I'm happy to have a discussion about that. I think that there is solid evidence, again going back to Marx and Engels' time, that there have been solid criticisms of anarchism for good reason the whole time, and it's these are very, very old discussions. But again, a lot of people, you can assume it's deliberate, but a lot of people just don't do the reading, so they're unaware. You'll see people running around on social media Marx was an anarchist. Anarchism is totally compatible with Marxism. What? No, it isn't. Have you done any what are you basing this on? You can't just make shit up. But yet, there are a lot of people making shit up, so yeah. That's a major reason I do the texts, is because then you put the resources out there, people can actually, stand a chance of knowing what the fuck they're talking about, and not just keep doing the same mistakes over and over. I love the commentary. Good. I think more people do than don't, so yeah, good. No, I'm getting a few comments about the comments on comments. There you go. Comments within comments. Wolf is textbook revisionist. Yeah, I think of Richard Wolff, and I made a few videos about this. I think he's more of an anarchist or mutualist than a Marxist or Marxian. I really don't think he is a Marxist. I think he's really, really more of an anarchist. But he did get me into socialism post-Bernie. Yeah, but now you're here. You know what I mean? Let's say that there hadn't been communist YouTube channels like S4A out there, and you had just had Wolf to go on. Where would you be now? Would you have given up on it? Because I know for me, going through that sort of ANCOM thing, I didn't really know where to turn, to sort of go beyond it and to move past what I was realizing more and more were the errors of it. Just read some stuff on Marxists.org about what Dimitrov wrote. I agree with most stuff except the Marxist jargon. Excuse me, but what Marxist jargon are you talking about? He was literally the head of the Communist International. Like, how do you agree with it except for the Marxist jargon, which is kind of fundamental to what he's saying? I'd just like to understand what you're saying here. Why was the Northeast so particularly bad in 2022? That spike is insane. It's cold, and there's a lot of people that live there. So, a lot of indoor air. New York City, unlike the other more northern parts of the U.S., the Pacific Northwest, the sort of, northern Midwest. I mean, that whole area of like the Pacific Northwest, Montana, Idaho, the Dakotas, like very few people live there. And in the Northeast, you have New York, Philadelphia, Boston, pretty big cities. So that's why. And then other places, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, a lot of people live there. So that's why the spike is so bad, is it's one of the colder areas of the country and a lot of people live there. I'm not a Marxist or communist, but I would like to learn more about it. Okay, well, you're in the right place. Go to youtube.com/socialism for all. We have a lot of videos discussing it. You can also ask questions here if you'd like. The idea is for more people to learn about it, so there you go. And by the way, I just thought your comment about agreeing with stuff except the Marxist jargon was funny, because it's just foundational to what he says. So I'm just wondering how a person agrees with what he's saying without agreeing with the Marxist stuff, because I think it's all Marxist stuff, but anyway. Yeah, foreignlanguages.press is another good site. They do in-house versions of audiobooks of a lot of their things. Not all of them, but a lot of them. How do you see the abolition of private property implemented? How do you transition from the capitalist structure we now have to a Marxist socialist system? I agree we have to change the status quo since it is unsustainable. So the basic process of class struggle under capitalism is for the revolutionary proletariat, which proletariat means propertyless wage workers, people who really don't own anything, don't own capital, don't really own anything except for their own labor power, which they sell to capitalists in order to live. That's wage work. Proletarians getting organized into labor unions, fighting, striking for increased class power, so that the balance of power within the industries shifts away from the capitalists to doing more of what the workers want, implementing more of the workers' demands. Political consciousness needs to be developed alongside this, so that not just the conquest of industry through industrial unionism, for example, you get that on the shop floor, but you also need to make preparations through a workers' party for the conquest of political power. Eventually, workers get strong enough and the strikes get big enough that the balance of power shifts entirely. The capitalists actually wind up in a position where they have less effective day-to-day power than the workers do, because the workers as a class are so organized and class conscious and militant that they're able to shut down the economy, redirect production, and also they have the political force ready to set up a workers' state in place of the bourgeois state, or capitalist state. Bourgeois is a synonym for that. And then, how was the United States founded? There was a Revolutionary War. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a war. We'd prefer, if it isn't, we'd prefer the capitalists to just say, we give up, okay, you guys win, take over. In practice, they don't usually do that. They'd rather drop a nuclear bomb on you. So, we fight until we win. because, yes, as you said, the status quo is unsustainable. There's a rough overview. Marxism-Leninism is Marxism in the age of imperialism and proletarian revolution. Was developed about a century ago, and there have been a number of proletarian revolutions since 1917. Unfortunately, we're living in a period of counter-revolution where capitalism, global imperialism, has been beating back the workers' movements and gaining power again. But this will only go so far. Workers are too educated and have too many tools at our disposal to remain down forever. And we will reorganize, and we will fight, and we will win. So, and the important thing to understand is capitalism has existed for a few hundred years. Before that was feudalism. That existed for a relatively longer period of time, but also society changed more slowly in those days. And before that was the slave state, so like Rome and stuff like that. So there have been different modes of production over time, and they all have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Capitalism is nearing its end, but it is ended by organized workers. So that's a brief overview. Become the Dan Carlin of communism. Who's Dan Carlin? I read a bit about dialectical materialism. Do Marx and Engels mean that you can only derive knowledge from the sense of living through practical ideas? I'm not sure I quite get that, but so they are, for instance, against thought experiments as a means of acquiring knowledge. Are they reacting against the Enlightenment ideal of reason? No, not at all. Dialectical materialism should be understood in relationship to, actually, so we put a 2-hour audiobook up on the channel just recently that I would point your attention to. The name of it is, just want to get the exact right name, Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy by Engels. It's in like the 4th or 5th row of videos if you go to the YouTube channel and scroll down. So when Marx and Engels are talking about dialectical materialism, they mean dialectical as opposed to metaphysical. Metaphysics in this sense is a philosophical trend which tends to regard ideas as static and existing sort of as isolated things in themselves. Dialectics refers to an interconnected web of causality where no individual phenomenon exists in isolation. It's what seems at any one point in time to be a thing is actually a process. And what might seem not to be connected to anything else is in fact interconnected in a big web of causality with many other things. So the dialectics means that things are always existing in relationship to other things and shouldn't be understood as static in the metaphysical sense. The materialism stands in opposition to idealism. In other words, there was kind of this split among philosophers, particularly Hegel, and then after Feuerbach, that idealism in this sense is that ideas come first. Ideas are what shape reality primarily, and that material reality is subordinate to ideas. Materialism says no. Material reality comes first, and as we are thinking matter, we generate ideas and ideology that basically support material existence, but that material life comes first. Idealism is, or ideas obviously exist, but they're secondary to material reality, just in understanding the relation or the dialectic between material things and the world of ideas. In that dialectic, the material takes precedence. So dialectical materialism is understanding the material world as dynamic processes in an interconnected web of relationships of causality with each other. This is like basically widely accepted by science now, but what Marx and Engels were trying to do was apply this into the social sciences realm and trying to break through the dusty old philosophy, religion, and ruling class ideology that was holding people back and develop a scientific socialism. So there are kinds of sociology now which are scientific, but they also have the class ideology or the class lens of the bourgeoisie. So you might call them bourgeois sociology. We're primarily interested in looking at things through a class lens, although other kinds of division, other kinds of bigotry, nationalism, sexism, things like that, are also used by the bourgeoisie to influence society significantly for their own benefit. And so, when evaluating bourgeois socialism, that is not primarily talking about class interests, that's just something to keep in mind. It's not to say the other things don't have an effect or aren't important. Bourgeois sociology is never going to tell you that there needs to be a proletarian revolution, for example, even though that is pretty much the obvious conclusion anyone can draw from studying the development of history in the way that Marx and Engels did. So, yeah. Next comment. I would be anarchist if not for S4A and Hakim, Wolf, and podcasts like Behind the Bastards and Jacobin. I would be anarchist if not for S4A and Hakim. Period. Wolf and podcasts like Behind the Bastards and Jacobin funnel people into anarchism. I think Jacobin also funnels people into reformism and like SocDem stuff too. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up regarding the COVID spike in the Northeast. Is there a Marxist dictionary for common terminology? Marxists.org does have a glossary. There will be a Trotskyist bent to it, but yeah, let me get the address for you. I do often use it, although again, you got to account for the Trotskyism. Marxists.org/glossary/index.htm will get you to the page. There's probably also a link off of like the front page. And yeah, it's pretty useful. Although again, when they start talking about Stalinism, big grain of salt, get out your salt shaker. Stuff like lumpen proletariat. I still don't really know what you mean. Lumpen proletariat was a term used by Marx to refer to the, quote, dangerous classes. That is, people who were not capitalists, not rich, and basically just made their living through like pickpocketing and kind of other just like criminal activities, riffraff kind of thing, which wasn't just a way of looking down on people, but it wasn't just oh, you're poor, I'm going to call you riffraff. It was specifically people who had taken up sort of swindling as a lifestyle, but who were not capitalists. And he described, for example, in 18th Brumaire, these were some of the people supporting the reactionary forces. It's kind of like when we talk about decay in the fascist stage of capitalism, some of the just kind of scummy shit that working people turn to. So anyway, I think I personally think that lumpen proletariat is like very much overused today, and that people distort its meaning radically. I think there was a very clear meaning that the way that Marx was using it, you get kind of a very clear mental image of who he meant, and I think that the term is overused today. There's like people talking about homeless people as lumpen proletariat. Okay, most homeless people in the U.S. are proletarian. They just don't have a house. They're not lumpen. Lumpen is like rabble, like in the sense of dangerous or like a specifically criminal element. It's just, and people who make their living that way, it's not necessarily just people who are like really down and out. Not everybody who's down and out turns to like pickpocketing and drug dealing and whatever. And again, there's a difference I think even Marx would make, that I definitely would make, between selling cannabis where it's illegal, and then increasingly now it's becoming decriminalized, which is wonderful. Far, far, far safer overall than like alcohol, for example. Like flat out good for you in certain respects when used within limits like any substance. But there's things that are illegal that victimize nobody, and then there are things that are illegal that do victimize people, like theft and things like that. where somebody loses personal property as a result of the crime. I think Marx would make that distinction, and to me, it seemed more like victimizing crime seemed to be more of the lumpen proletariat. Again, it's not a term anyone ever bothered really defining in a hard way, because I think Marx was just using it to paint a picture rather than do hard analysis at that point. I think it's a mistake to actually apply that term too rigidly. I know that there's this whole theory coming out of like the Black Panthers Party of the and it actually isn't just, I think it's Marcuse as well, promoting the idea of the revolutionary potential of the lumpen proletariat over the proletariat. And this is completely wrong. I think the reasoning that it's founded on is also completely wrong. But yeah, I think people really, really abuse that term. Anyway, I think that the nature of fascism, how militant it is and how it leads to war, they're trying to solve the problem of markets by enslaving the weak nations. That is why they need fascism. Yeah, it reminds me of Lebensraum. Yeah, Lebensraum being living space for the German nation under Nazism. Yeah, I mean, so you can understand fascism as the ideology of advanced capitalism. It's the ideology of capitalism in the imperialist phase. Imperialist capitalism is distinct from early phase capitalism, where there's lots of capitalists fighting against the existing feudal order, just struggling to like eke out their system, and it's not very consolidated, and there's a lot of petty bourgeoisie, smaller business people. And then later phase capitalism, when it becomes imperialism, is characterized more by highly consolidated enterprises, monopolies, and so on. And fascism is the ideology of the imperialist phase of capitalism. So it's not just a hard definition of like, it's a light switch. One day you're not fascist and then boom, it's fascism. It's a gradient. There's a process of fascization as your society becomes more fascist as your society becomes more imperialist. It's not just a binary on-off thing. Have I checked the Juche Gang YouTube channel? It focuses on Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il's theories. I haven't really watched that channel that much. I have interacted with the Juche Gang guy on YouTube. We seem to get along, and he makes good posts. So as far as I can tell, yeah, what I've seen from Juche Gang is good. Yeah, so there's another comment about fascism in Italy. Let's see. Contextualized, I think he means all imperialism is fascist. Well, anyway, I think I just addressed that in that comment. So there's a process of fascization. Not all fascism looks exactly the same, but it is the ideology of imperialism intended to run an imperialist society. So Lenin would say to the working class in fascist or even in imperialist nations, a nation cannot be free if it oppresses other nations. That is correct. And by that by that correct standard, the USA is very, very, very unfree. Yeah, so we're talking about definitions of fascism. Let me give you a link here. We read this a while back in an earlier live stream. The class nature of fascism from Politsturm. Let me give you this article. We read it out previously. That is going into the chat. There it is. Check out that article when you get a chance. I think it'll clear some things up for you. Got pulled into a long work meeting. Yikes. Yeah, that was a while ago. Crime bosses themselves are more similar to petty bourgeoisie. Yeah, I mean, it's a business. It's a business. Third way was usually used by fascists. Perón was the only leader I can think of that wasn't fascist and used that term. Yeah, I'm not going to get into a whole thing on Perón, but yeah, third way. The idea of the third way that the fascists put out was, neither capitalism nor Bolshevism. that they have some other way of sort of resolving the class struggle. And it was basically just class collaboration, so basically just capitalism. So, yeah. So, there's a thing, lumpen, I thought lumpen meant disenfranchised. Lumpen was just a term, like, meaning, like, ragged, kind of. So, at the time, in 19th century German, people would use the prefix lumpen, because German is a language of compound words. They would say lumpen whatever, lumpen, I don't even know what, but they would just put it as a prefix on everything. So, anyway, lumpen proletariat became coined to describe, the lumpen proletariat. So, oh yeah, there's also the Prolocult's film on fascism and decay. That's 2 hours long. Yeah, I would recommend that as well. So anyway, we're about caught up with the chat, and we're just about on time to do that. So if anybody else has any other questions or things that they'd like to get in, I think there were a few hiccups in this stream. See, there's one now. I think there were a few hiccups in this stream, but not too many. Did I watch Oppenheimer? Fuck no. I'm not going to go sit in some COVID-laden theater to let Hollywood brainwash me. No. I mean, again, not that, all movies are fucking brainwashing. The amount of fucking, PR that Barbie and Oppenheimer are getting, I don't remember the last time they pushed two movies so hard. No, I mean, I generally, if everybody likes a movie, I generally don't like it. No. I'm not even slightly interested in spending, $15 or whatever to go watch Christopher Nolan, do atomic bomb worship. And I could not be less interested in watching the Barbie movie. So, yeah. No, you're welcome. I mean, you came in, so the person I was answering a lot of questions to, said, I would just like to thank you for the hospitality in the stream. We genuinely would like more people. There's a lot of misconceptions about socialism, class struggle, capitalist exploitation. We genuinely need more people to understand this, and I think more people will, as you did, come to the conclusion that the status quo is unsustainable. The thing that you find out when you go back through the history of class struggle, the Communist Manifesto was 175 years ago. What you find is that this shit's been going on the whole time. We're very much kept in the dark in the U.S. about the history of class struggle, the history of socialism, the history of the struggle against capitalism. But that doesn't mean it hasn't been going on. And actually, a lot of the arguments we're having, in the left or the working class generally today, they were already had 100 years ago. There's no need to reinvent the wheel if we will just learn history. So, yeah. And again, capitalism is capitalism. The logic of it is not extensively complicated. There are certain parts of it, like I mentioned, it's more monopolies, it's more consolidated, and it's higher tech than it used to be. But the basic dynamics of it are the same now that they were 100 years ago. Imperialism is still imperialism. Class struggle is still class struggle. And just overall, many, not all, but many of the dynamics are very, very similar. And we always have to apply these principles intelligently to the particular circumstances in which we find ourselves. But generally speaking, a lot of the broad strokes are very similar. Yeah, no, there's a comment, I tend to be put off by stuff that's overly popular, and I swear I'm not just trying to be different. Yeah, I mean, it's, again, if it appeals to most people, I've just found it is likely not to appeal to me that much. And that's just after watching Oscar bait movies over and over again for years. And it's I to this day haven't seen most of the later Tom Hanks things, Castaway or Apollo, whatever the fuck, was it Apollo 13? I know I'm going to get halfway through the movie and just be like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Because that's just what always happens. So yeah, I'm just not in sync with sort of mainstream sentiment, and that's what those things are all about. So Is there Oppenheimer in Socialism or a Barbie movie? Do you mean is there socialism in Oppenheimer? Is there Oppenheimer in Socialism or Barbie movie? What? I am studying history in a European university, and so I got interested in modern day problems in politics. That's exactly what I'm saying, is we study the history and the theory, which are based on each other, in order to solve present day problems. That is like the whole point. So I would like to understand the ideologies and the mode of thinking they're based on a bit better. Are you in a Western European? Are you in a formerly socialist country, or are you in a like a Western European country? Just out of curiosity there. The Netherlands. Okay, so Western. Yeah. But yeah, class struggle is going to be coming to the Netherlands. I mean, you will get fascism first, no doubt. I mean, all of the anti-immigrant stuff, that very reactionary stuff, this is fascism taking shape. And we see, like in Italy recently, there was, also check out in the channels tab on the YouTube channel. I have linked to a number of other channels. There's another channel, Besd Marx, BESD Marx, has done videos on the rising Italian neo-fascism. So like Italy just elected a prime minister who has been a lifelong member since age 15 of neo-fascist parties, including the successor to Mussolini's party. So we're seeing fascism in the far right making a resurgence. So yeah, the more you understand these things now, the more you can pick the correct side in the class struggle. Ooh, modern macroeconomics. Oh boy. You might want to also read Marx's Value, Price, and Profit as just a counter. Inoculate yourself a little bit. Also, Wage, Labor, and Capital. Those two combined will take you about 4 hours, maybe 4.5, and you'll be able to inoculate yourself a little bit at least against macroeconomics, which is more religion and like hocus pocus than anything else. I'm kind of annoyed with all of the, quote, anti-capitalist media coming out. The best of it, and probably the most sincere and genuine, was probably Parasite. But it's kind of been downhill from here. And it all just feels extremely grifty. Well, yeah, I mean, most of the people involved in making these movies have no dog in that fight. They're fairly rich themselves. And also, yeah, I mean, when you start seeing... Okay, I may have made this point before, but there's a lot of young adult, like the Hunger Games, in the Hunger Games type of genre as well. There's a number of other things, the Maze Runner, like I'm sure I'm leaving out a lot of them, but there's this kind of new genre of young adult apocalyptic fiction where, some teenager like saves the world or something. They're quite happy to show you that because it coincides with a petty bourgeois, ineffective, adventurist type of, quote, liberation of a superhero, basically, let alone all of the actual superhero movies. What they're not going to show you is movies about labor organizing, how to start a union, and so on and so on. There are very few movies at all that discuss unionization, let alone sort of show in gritty detail the whole process. So when we start seeing that, maybe I'll save my applause for that. But until then, I think it's just selling people, good feelings and nothing that's really going to be too dangerous to the status quo at all. I had another thought, what was it? Where did that comment go? Yeah, the media's interest in radical politics is only to capture it and sell the idea, but then sort of split off from any sort of dangerously class consciousness inspiring portions of the content. And I love Parasite as a movie. I think it's very good. But again, it's not like a movie about mass struggle or anything. It's just sort of a criticism of the rich and things like that. But it's not like a successful mass revolutionary worker struggle, anything like that. I mean, there's the movie Reds, which I must confess I haven't seen the whole thing. but very, 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 very few movies will actually show anything like that. Are there any good red unions in the U.S.? Not really. There's the IWW, but it's very niche. It's also completely poisoned by anarchist ideology, in my opinion. But yeah, it's very small. I do have IWW organizing manuals up on the channel. If people want to hear those, there's one that's 20 minutes long, one that's like an hour long, and one that's 3 hours long that have different level of detail of how to do a DIY labor union, get something going in your workplace. But it's not a very big union. They've done Starbucks organizing. They've done organizing at different fast food chains with some success, and that's to be applauded. But it's not a major union right now. It does hold out, some kind of a placeholder at least for radical unionism. Aside from that, the UE, United Electrical, is kind of known as one of the more militantly democratic unions. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of good red unions in the US right now. Seems like using the state as a weapon against various minority groups, a form of fascism, is the result of any capitalist polity when the people have so little power. Am I learning? Yeah, I mean, scapegoating people in such a way that you're substituting other kinds of conflict for class conflict, that's like a hallmark of fascism for sure. It's also to keep, like in the US, where undocumented workers form a significant portion of the labor market, continuing a situation where they're so persecuted and have so few rights, it undermines the whole labor movement as a whole, which is kind of only as strong as its weakest link. So, these are all examples of fascism sort of benefiting the capitalist status quo. Individualist stories in those movies for an alienated time. Yeah, I mean, again, breaking out of that sort of superhero, the chosen one mindset into movies oriented around mass struggle type plots, that's when you'll know something is actually changing, I think. Spanish Conservative Party being elected again, Macron probably being beaten by Le Pen. Macron, who is already right-wing, being beaten by the neo-fascist Le Pen. Agro-fascism rising in the Netherlands. Yeah, so, okay, there's a good example. The Dutch, quote, farmers' protests. These are landowners. They're not like proletarian farm workers. Those are rich landowners that are staging reactionary demonstrations. And again, one of the hallmarks of fascism in its appearance is that it will copy elements of socialist rhetoric, elements of socialist aesthetics, but it will then have counter-revolutionary content. And, that whole thing, we have a number of opportunist media figures in the U.S., Jimmy Dore being one example, that were supporting those Dutch, quote, farmers' protests is like, what, you're not for the farmers? And the same thing in Canada when they were having right-wing, quote, truckers protests. It's the same thing. It's people that have some of the aesthetics of a working class movement, but counter-revolutionary content. This is like pretty much how you get a fascist movement started. And we see that several years now underway. I mean, I think it started in the George W. Bush years, even with things like the Minutemen and all the anti-immigrant sentiment then. But there wasn't really the mass movement until the Tea Party and the birthers and now MAGA. Like, they're really consolidating that reactionary mass movement. And again, I say mass, it's not the proletarian masses, it's more of a petty bourgeois movement, but it's people who aren't just in the country clubs, in other words. It's not just the richest of the rich. They're actually finding some support out there in at least the 10%, or 20% of, petty bourgeois people and people with lower class consciousness. Means TV are ANCAP grifters, says a commenter. I haven't really watched enough of that to say, so I don't know. Andor is probably the closest to communist media we have in the U.S. Andor. I don't even know what that is. I've never heard. I've heard of Means TV. I haven't even heard of Andor. Okay. Marxist Paul did a sort of warning about that terrible and dangerous, quote, anti-capitalist film that came out that tried to adapt the book How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Okay, so they have a video about that? Yeah, I know nothing about that. The most labor-oriented movie I can remember is 9 to 5. That was from the early 80s. Yeah, definitely. That's a fairly decent one that I can recall. I don't know like what the fatal twist in it is, because they've always got to put something that undermines it in there. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of them. Norma Ray. I like Gung Ho as a comedy. Michael Keaton's in that. Although, in the end, like what the union's fighting for is like pretty weak, and it plays into a lot of stereotypes about like American workers, and like unions in general being like lazy and things like that. So, I mean, was kind of funny aside from that. But, yeah, actually, there's a book. I feel like I have a stack of books. It's probably in here somewhere. I want to get the name of it right. I don't know if it's in this stack of books. Let me look it up. It's Working Stiffs. So the author is Tom Zaniello, Zaniello, and the title of the book is Working Stiffs, Union Maids, Reds, and Riffraff. And it's 350 movies that are like some kind of labor film with a discussion of them. So if people who are interested in movies, that book by Zaniello, there's a few other ones out there that are like, you know, another excellent labor movie is Matewan, Matewan. Less modern, it's like set about 100 years ago, but is about real world events and really is kind of more of the sort of mass struggle thing that I was talking about. Like that's kind of a more realistic look inside of a campaign that might have been going on at that time with the United Mine Workers and the IWW. And that's set in during the Coal Wars. In the 1920s, I guess. Socialist movie night would be pretty cool. Somebody wants to put that together. The pipeline video was nuts to see how much it was trying to get young radicals arrested, hurt, or killed. Now I'm going to have to watch it. I feel like, yeah, that may require as much discussion as we can get going on it. I love the part where it's like, don't worry about the FBI. Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so another fascist trope arising again currently is cultural Marxism, rhyming with Judeo-Bolshevism. Yeah, this is basically recycled Nazi myths. I suppose a lot of people in the West, perhaps through the enforced individualism, mass consuming, mass culture, and unobtainable capitalist ideals that lead to a lost purpose, hopelessness, despair. I think that is a building block for fascism. Yeah, watch that video, Decay. I'll give you the link. Prolocult, Fascism, Decay. I'll get the link for you in a second. But yeah, this is basically like, you know, the quote, moral decline. Well, it's as people are unable to actually provide for themselves, yeah, they tend to lose hope. You know, provide for themselves, for their dependents. Here we go. Finally found it. Just kept giving me Patreon links for a minute there. There you go. There's the Decay on Fascism documentary. I think that's a building block for fascism since these people mostly act on emotions. Yes, irrationalism and anti-intellectualism is another cornerstone of fascism. The sort of mystical anti-science thing, that's why you see the anti-vax stuff and you know, COVID denial, AIDS denial, and people like RFK Jr. These people mostly act on emotions and would like the identity-giving aspect of fascism in that military structure with the nation state. Well, yeah, it's unnatural. It's a product of class society. So, Yeah, in other words, these people are desperately seeking some kind of conformity within. They want something to belong to because their identity, the more traditional, and again, still constructed by an earlier era of class society, but relatively more traditional standards of identity and activities, they're no longer able to obtain them because capitalism, as it continues to advance, has eroded the foundation of those. So as capitalism continues to update material conditions, it then also has to update the ideology, but the ideology lags. And so people are looking back to like, why can't we live like we did in the 50s? Well, capitalism's at a different state of development. It has different needs for the working class. It needs you to believe different things now because it needs to use you in a different way. And it needed to use you in one way in the past. That's why it had you believe those things in the first place. It's all ruling class ideology, but it lags behind the material reality. Again, sort of proving the primacy of the material reality. But then the ideology comes into play to help enforce that. I like to make the analogy between materialism and ideology that, let's say you're crossing a street, all right? That's your material reality, is both feet are in the street and there's a bus coming your way. That's the material realities. If you stand in that street, the bus is going to hit you. That's just the laws of physics. That's what your atoms are going to do. They're going to collide with the bus. And, due to electromagnetic force, you're not going to be able to pass through the bus. You'll be squashed. Okay, so that's your material reality. The ideological component is yourself looking at that and forming the thought, hey, I need to get out of the road. There's your ideology. It lags behind the material reality, but it helps to influence the next stage of the material reality. So if you listen to that thought and recognize that to be a good and pure thought, then you will keep moving and you will get out of the road because you're going to get hit by that bus. So anyway, the ideology lags behind material reality, but we need to understand that the ideology being put out there is primarily done by the ruling class in furtherance of their continued rule. Now, in capitalism, as the proletariat forms as more of a class-conscious force, we also develop proletarian ideology. And, that is the revolutionary ideology of socialism. So, just putting it in context there. Richard Wolff supported the Canadian truckers. Yeah, he was supporting anti-vax shit and cops unions too. Fuck Richard Wolff. I was watching Hitler, The Rise of Evil. Yeah, and no doubt it was evil. I mean, it grossly violated every known moral that most people, hold. But it's not like evil in some supernatural sense. 1919, Hitler was on the streets of Munich and saw a communist newspaper with a headline, "Pride is a Weapon," and the next scene he appropriated that term for his speech. Yeah, this is like textbook fascism is co-opting socialist ideas for counter-revolutionary purpose. Metropolis is a silent black and white film that's pro-labor. Watched in college. Rewatch that, my friend, because that is not pro-labor. It deals with the subject of labor, but it is actually for a very reformist, pro-capitalist message in the end, because the radical, who is actually, spoiler alert, the radical who is promoting revolution among the workers is shown to actually be an evil robot put out there to sow discord, and the good heavenly message is actually that what is it? The heart and the hand need to work in communication. The labor is the hand, the capitalist is the heart, and they have to the capital is the brain, the labor is the hands, and they have to communicate through the heart. I mean, this is class collaborationism just blatantly. So, rewatch Metropolis. It's actually very anti-communist. I mean, Metropolis is known for its stark kind of surreal imagery, but the message fucking sucks. The main problem I have with Marxism Communism is that I don't think people are inherently good. That's actually not a contradiction. Marxists don't believe that either. Humanists believe people are inherently good. Marxism is not humanist in that sense. It's kind of neutral on that question. People have intelligence and imagination. We have vast capacity for cruelty. We have vast capacity for kindness. We are also very social creatures in that people on the inside are a reflection of the society that socializes them and the opportunities that they're given. So the idea of Marxism is to set up a society that's free of class contradictions by abolishing the capitalist class and then just having everyone be proletarian, which is the direction we're already heading in capitalism. And then in a society that's free of class conflicts, you can do a lot more to have the average working person be set up with opportunities for a dignified life, with education, with work that's not going to completely run them down and kill them, with opportunities for recreation and all kinds of stuff. So Marxism communism doesn't think that people are inherently good either. It's trying to set up a society that's free of class contradictions, where people are given more opportunities to just work collaboratively. In other words, like I said, people have the capacity to, because we have intelligence and imagination, to be either very cruel or very kind, or even indifferent and checked out. But it's kind of like the direction that you get socialized in that it's your material conditions that kind of shapes what ends up happening. So we want to give people more good opportunities than are possible in capitalism. Anyway, people can't responsibly live in a commune. Well, that's not really what communism is about per se. The selfish gene convinced me of the opposite. I mean, that's reactionary ideology right there. I also think our societal structure is too complex. Too complex for what? So the idea in socialism is that the party makes economic plans, but that basically unions run the economy according to the plan. There will be different implementations of that, but okay. And you also think that history is more random and doesn't have an endpoint. What's the endpoint? So what we can see in capitalism is that the longer capitalism runs, true to Marx and Engels' deductions, the longer capitalism runs, the class composition is more and more changed to whatever it was before, artisan, peasantry, whatever, into proletarian, dispossessed wage worker. All right, that's true. So like the United States at the time of the Civil War, 150-ish years ago, was like 90% agricultural. Today it's 90% proletarian. So the class composition has changed in accordance with the basic principle or basic, understanding that Marxism has of historical development, that capitalism proletarianizes the population. All right? So that's true. If capitalism proletarianizes the population, even in the most backward countries, eventually everyone will be proletarian, except for maybe 5 to 10% who are petty bourgeois, although even that will shrink over time. And then 1% are big bourgeoisie, rich capitalists. Then you've got a situation where 90+% of the population in a society based on private property has no interest in the prevailing order of private property. What do you think will happen where we see that history, over and over again, has a revolutionary class emerge and then become the new ruling class? The prediction of Marxism is that the proletariat, this growing massive revolutionary class with access to the means of production, will take over society. So what other, quote, random outcome do you think is going to happen other than that? I think it's just a matter of time before that happens. I mean, it's a matter of organization as well. But that organization and people realizing that necessity is a matter of time. What other random outcome do you think there will be, and why? Anyway, these are good questions, by the way. I thank you for bringing them up, because, yeah, these are questions people have about Marxism. Michael Parenti has a video about movies, and there were a few movies he recommended. I've wanted to check them out. Maybe I'll do so if I put together a socialist movie night. Does anyone here attend, or has anyone heard of Sunday Assembly? No, it's a secular gathering community. Most people I've met there are rational. Most are Marxist, or would be if you were to keep them talking. The branch I used to attend in Salt Lake was a way to organize. Ooh, Mormon country. Looking back now, it was a missed or underutilized organizing opportunity. No, I haven't heard of Sunday Assembly. Let me open a tab on that. Now that I've closed all my Twitter tabs and gotten off of that, first of all, my browser is crashing a lot less, but I have more room for other good research tabs like that. All right, coming back to that. We are a network of secular, non-religious communities who gather to celebrate this one life we know we have. Okay, it's founded in 2013 in London, so it's pretty new. Might be why I haven't heard of it, but thank you for that. Didn't know Richard Wolff was supporting anti-vaxxers too. Yeah, it was some really bad tailism. I forget exactly what he said. All right, and then the response to that, thank you so much. You guys changed my mind a bit about Marxists. All the people I spoke to up until now were really pedantic, screaming that I had no understanding of history. So those people are very bad communicators. Even if even if their understanding was right, they obviously can't communicate at all. So that's unfortunate. They were not representing Marxism very well at all. I really like this discussion, listening to you guys and viewing a bit in your worldview. I see you identified the same problems as I did. I'm still skeptical about the solutions and how systems work. However, I realize I have a lot to learn. I'm eager to speak to you guys after I read a bit more. Well, there you go. Yeah, I came to this whole thing a bit through a process of elimination myself. It seemed clear to me that no other... I considered a lot of other political options, in other words. And it seemed clear to me that nothing else really had any power to fundamentally change society along class lines in the way that actually need to happen. I started out very interested in the anti-war issue. So this was about 20 years ago when the U.S. was invading Afghanistan and Iraq. And also remilitarizing society with the Patriot Act and the jingoism, all the warlike nationalism under the Bush-Cheney years and the post-9/11, radical sort of cultural counter-revolution of the post-9/11 era. I became very interested then in what was going on and why. And eventually, it took me a little under 10 years, but I eventually saw that it was socialism, a movement of organized workers that could actually stop the war, that could actually stop world hunger, that could actually stop pollution, etc. The capitalists, the people who currently control production, are never going to do that. They're bound by short-term profit needs above all else, and they cannot deviate from that, even if they know it's going to kill their system by killing the planet, because there's no profits on a dead planet, but they can't stop. We literally have to take it out of their hands. So it was that for me that all of these issues, the environment, war, hunger, poverty, and so on, it came down to which class has power, which class rules society. And then I learned that socialism is the name for the working class taking power in society. And I said, oh, well, there have been a number of socialist experiments and revolutions so far, and it's been under extremely hostile conditions, a lot of adversity. Capitalists, imperialists have tried to undermine socialism at every turn, starve them, blockade them, sanction them, make it as difficult as possible for working people in control of their national politics to actually succeed and thrive. Absent that, I think the USSR would still be around, and so on. The class struggle would be, we'd be in a really different place. The imperialists, that is the advanced capitalists, have proved to be a very tenacious enemy that is willing to use basically any method to keep socialism from working. And, as we come out of this period of counter-revolution and extreme bleak reaction, as workers gain more power again, socialism is the destination. That's if we take power away from the capitalists, and you have to completely take it away and then proletarianize them. That's how you create a classless society. And then run the economy according to a rational plan. That's literally the only way out of it. And I saw the connection between war and pollution, poverty, all of it. Name a social problem, it comes down to which class is in charge. And are you running industry for profit or for use, for the general use of the population? Closing note here, tying this back into the last audiobook we put up, Socialism in the Churches by Rosa Luxemburg. She makes the point in there that the early Christian communism was a communism based on the sharing or common ownership of finished products, of consumption goods, food, furniture, clothing, whatever. The difference between that and Marxist, proletarian socialism of the modern type is our socialism is based on a sharing in common of the means of production, of productive industrial equipment. That's the point. Because back in the ancient Christian communist days, who did the work? It was slaves. Somehow the slaves were not included in this plan of shared property that just magically appeared out of the blue. They didn't really ask the question, who's making all this stuff that we're sharing? But now in the modern age, we're in a position to do that, is we share the productive infrastructure, but instead of running it for the profit of a few capitalists that legally own it, and the courts and police uphold that ownership, we run that just, we own it. We own the food factory, whatever, factory that makes bread, pasta, whatever. We run that, we say, what do we need this month? We need X loaves of bread, we need X pounds of pasta, crank it out, boom. You're not producing for speculative profit anymore. You're not having the factory getting bought out by some competitive capitalist who's going to sell it off for parts. I mean, look at what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter right now. This is what happens. It's just a very grotesque example and a very clear and obvious example of what happens when you let, lone capitalists or even groups of capitalists just do as they please with what should be shared property that can only be operated properly by large groups of people. So again, that's it. Different socialist projects have had different contexts and tried slightly different things. We're going to keep going until we get it right, because if capitalism stays in charge, they'll kill the earth and everyone on it. I mean, that's just the point we're at now, the level of technology that we have. It's potentially that destructive. So aside from the poverty and aside from the war, we can't wait anymore with climate change and everything else. So this is a must. It's inevitable if we want a future for humanity. It's a necessity. But we do have to work and organize for it and fight for it. All right, we are going to leave it there. We're actually caught up with the chat, so this is all good timing. Thank you for the questions. The Kievit. So yeah, we're going to leave it there. We're going to stream again on Thursday, same time. Look for announcements on Patreon, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. No longer Twitter for that. And thanks. We'll see you in the next video.